Brown has been arrested.
Auditors revealed that nearly $2 billion has gone missing.
This has been a wild ride for Wirecard. You only need to look at the share price over the past 5 days.
On the afternoon of July 1st, 2025, a team of investigative journalists from Der Spiegel and The Insider spotted a man walking across Moscow's Trubnaya Square. He was relaxed. He was unhurried. He was wearing a dark suit. His hair was short. He moved through the busy street the way a person moves when they have no reason to hide, when they are, in fact, protected. His name was Jan Marsalek, and he was, at that moment, one of the most wanted men in Europe. He was wanted for his role in the largest corporate fraud in post-war German history, a fraud that wiped out 1.9 billion euros and brought down one of Europe's most celebrated financial companies. He was wanted in connection with a Russian espionage network that had surveilled journalists, monitored U.S. military installations, and plotted kidnappings across the European continent. He had been living openly in Moscow for 5 years. And nobody, not Interpol, not German prosecutors, not British intelligence, could do a thing about it. This is the story of Jan Marsalek, and it starts, as so many stories of this kind do, with a number that was too good to be true. To understand what happened, you have to understand what Wirecard was and what it represented. Founded in the late 1990s in Munich, Wirecard was a payment processing company. In simple terms, it built the digital infrastructure that allowed businesses to accept card payments online. It was in the early days a quiet back-office technology company. But over the 2000s and 2010s, it transformed into something far more glamorous. Under the leadership of CEO Markus Braun, an Austrian technology executive with a doctorate and a vision for a cashless global economy, Wirecard became the darling of European fintech. It expanded aggressively into Asia, the Middle East, and the Americas. It claimed partnerships with some of the world's largest companies. Its revenues appear to grow at extraordinary speed. By 2018, Wirecard's market capitalization crossed 24 billion euros. It was added to the DAX, Germany's blue-chip stock index, home to the country's 30 most prestigious companies. It displaced Commerzbank, one of Germany's oldest banks, to take that slot. Politicians celebrated it. Analysts celebrated it. The German financial press celebrated it. Wirecard was held up as proof that Europe could compete with Silicon Valley, that a German company could build a global financial technology empire. Markus Braun, its CEO, became a public figure, polished, technical, visionary, and at his side, as chief operating officer, was Jan Marsalek. Jan Marsalek was born in Vienna in 1980. He was, by most accounts, brilliant in the particular way that makes people both admire and slightly fear you. He had not completed a university degree. He had an almost photographic memory. He spoke multiple languages. He moved through rooms with confidence. He cultivated relationships with intelligence figures, politicians, and financiers across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. He joined Wirecard in the early 2000s before it was famous and grew with it. By the time Wirecard was listed on the DAX, Marsalek was managing a vast global operation, overseeing partnerships and subsidiaries across dozens of countries. He was also, investigators would later allege, the architect of the fraud. And he was also, it would eventually emerge, a spy. But that part of the story would not become fully clear until long after Wirecard was gone. The core of the Wirecard scandal was a number, 1.9 billion euros. Wirecard claimed to hold this money in escrow accounts held at banks in the Philippines and Singapore. Funds generated by third-party partners processing payments on its behalf in Asia. This money appeared on Wirecard's balance sheet. It was treated as a real, audited asset. It made Wirecard look far more profitable than it actually was. The problem was that the money did not exist. Journalists at the Financial Times have been raising questions about Wirecard's accounts since 2015. The FT's reporters, particularly Dan McCrum, published a series of investigations suggesting the company's financial figures were inconsistent and potentially fraudulent. Wirecard pushed back aggressively. The company filed legal complaints. German regulators, bizarrely, initially investigated the FT journalists rather than the company itself. For 5 years, the story was dismissed, attacked, and buried. Then, in June 2020, Ernst & Young, Wirecard's longtime auditor, announced that it could not confirm the existence of the 1.9 billion euros in those Philippine escrow accounts. The banks had denied it was there. The third-party trustee, who was supposed to hold it, could not be located. The money was not missing. It had never existed. Wirecard filed for insolvency within days. Its stock, which had traded above 100 euros per share, collapsed to almost nothing. Billions of euros in shareholder value were erased. Creditor banks were left exposed to more than 3 billion euros in loans. Marcus Braun resigned and was arrested. Jan Marsalek disappeared. On July 18, 2020, Jan Marsalek was suspended from the Wirecard board pending investigation. 1 day later, he was gone. German authorities issued an arrest warrant. Interpol issued a red notice, the closest thing that exists to an international arrest warrant. His last confirmed location was the Philippines, or Belarus. Reports conflicted. What investigators did not yet fully understand was that Marsalek had not simply fled. He had evacuated. Marsalek had been, according to investigations published years later by The Insider, Der Spiegel, and other outlets, recruited by Russia's GRU, its military intelligence service, over a decade earlier. Not after the fraud, before it, during his ascent as one of Europe's most celebrated technology executives. The fraudulent empire of Wirecard, investigators came to believe, had served at least in part as a mechanism for moving money, accessing financial data, and maintaining cover for intelligence operations. Marsalek's extraordinary network of contacts across governments, intelligence agencies, and financial institutions, built under the banner of a legitimate tech company, was not merely the byproduct of corporate success. It was the point. When Wirecard fell, he didn't run. He went home. By the time the world was looking for Jan Marsalek, he was already settled in Moscow. He was not hiding. Surveillance footage reviewed by investigative journalists in 2025 showed Marsalek moving freely through central Moscow, riding e-scooters along shopping streets, commuting through the Moscow metro at Lubyanka station, directly adjacent to the FSB's fortress-like headquarters. By early 2025, tracking data indicated he was appearing at Lubyanka nearly every working day. He had traveled to Crimea. His phone signal had been tracked near occupied Ukrainian territory in 2024. He had been photographed in military-style clothing bearing a Z patch, the symbol used by Russian forces in Ukraine. He had, by multiple accounts, become not merely a fugitive sheltered by Russia, but an operational asset embedded within its intelligence architecture. An investigation by The Insider and Der Spiegel concluded that Marsalek held an active working role within Russian intelligence, described as an invaluable asset due to his deep connections across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The man who had once run the operations of a DAX-listed tech company was now running something else entirely. In 2023, British police arrested a Bulgarian national named Orlan Rusev in eastern England. In Rusev's possession, investigators found surveillance equipment and multiple false identity documents. They also found something far more significant: tens of thousands of messages exchanged between Rusev and Jan Marsalek. What those messages revealed was extraordinary. Marsalek had allegedly used Rusev to build and manage a network of spies operating in the United Kingdom. The network conducted surveillance on U.S. military installations in Europe. It monitored investigative journalists, including Christo Grozev, the Bellingcat reporter who had exposed Russian intelligence operations, including the Salisbury nerve agent attack. It surveilled Russian dissidents and Kazakhstani opposition figures, reportedly with plans to kidnap them. In one message presented at trial, Marsalek wrote about the possibility of a successful operation on British soil, a reference to the botched Salisbury assassination attempt, written with dark enthusiasm about doing better than the agents who had poisoned Sergei Skripal. Rusev pleaded guilty to spying for Russia. In May 2025, 6 Bulgarians connected to the network were convicted in London. The Metropolitan Police's Counterterrorism Command described Marsalek as a significant person of interest with ongoing investigations across multiple countries. He remains, as of 2026, free. While Marsalek walks free in Moscow, his former co-conspirator Marcus Braun has been sitting in a Munich courtroom since December 2022. The trial, described by German media as the largest criminal proceeding in post-war German economic history, has stretched across more than 3 years and 250 trial days. Braun has been in pre-trial detention since August 2020. He denies all charges. His defense strategy has been consistent. He claims that Marsalek and a small circle of conspirators ran a fraudulent shadow operation within Wirecard without his knowledge, that he was deceived, that the man who fled to Moscow is the man responsible. Prosecutors disagree. They argue that a fraud of this scale, sustaining fictitious accounts across multiple countries, deceiving auditors for years, manipulating markets, could not have been sustained without the CEO's knowledge and participation. One key prosecution witness, Oliver Bellenhaus, a former Wirecard executive in Dubai who reached a cooperation agreement with prosecutors, has provided testimony that investigators believe is central to establishing the full scope of the conspiracy. A verdict is expected in 2026. Braun faces up to 15 years in prison. Whatever the verdict, one of the 2 men most responsible for what happened at Wirecard will not be in that courtroom. He's in Moscow. The Wirecard scandal raises questions that go far beyond the collapse of a single company. How did a company sustaining a multi-billion euro fraud evade serious regulatory scrutiny for over 5 years, even as journalists published documented evidence of problems? Why did German financial regulators initially investigate the reporters rather than the company? Were there figures within German regulatory and political circles who actively protected Wirecard? And if so, why? And what exactly was the relationship between Wirecard and Russian intelligence from the beginning? Was Marsalek's recruitment a personal arrangement, or did it run deeper into the company itself? German parliamentary investigations have pointed to systemic failures in auditing, in financial regulation, in political oversight. Ernst & Young, the auditor that certified Wirecard accounts for years, has faced civil lawsuit from investors seeking billions in damages. The financial losses were catastrophic. Tens of thousands of shareholders, ordinary investors who had put their savings into a DAX company, lost everything. Banks were left with billions in unrecoverable loans. Employees lost their jobs. And the man investigators believe was at the center of it is photographed. In 2025, riding an e-scooter through Moscow on a summer afternoon. Jan Marsalek is 45 years old. He's been a fugitive for 5 years. He is on Interpol's Red Notice list. He is wanted in Germany, sought by intelligence agencies across Europe, and named in ongoing investigations in at least 2 countries. He appears to have no intention of turning himself in. Russia has no extradition treaty that would compel his return. And his value to Russian intelligence, his knowledge, his network, his connections across the financial and political structures of Europe, makes him, if anything, more protected with every passing year. The story of Wirecard began as a story about corporate fraud, about fake numbers and phantom accounts and auditors who signed documents without verifying what they certified. But it became something larger and stranger and more disturbing. It became the story of a man who spent a decade building one of Europe's most prominent companies as a cover for a different operation entirely. A man who, when the fraud collapsed, did not panic, did not run randomly, but walked calmly to the people who had been waiting for him. The 1.9 billion euros that never existed. The company that is gone. The trial that grinds on in Munich. And the executive, somewhere in Moscow, who no court in the Western world can touch. Some frauds end with a conviction. Some end with a sentencing. This one is still running. If this case disturbed you, the intersection of corporate crime, political failure, and active espionage, consider what it means for how we regulate, how we audit, and how easily the line between business and intelligence can disappear entirely.